was watching a video by Neutra's living son, and he was talking about the influence and contributions to architecture that both his father and his brother made. And he was a epidemiologist for all of his career, and then as his brothers started to age and his health was failing, basically reached out to his brother and said, hey, can you take on, you've retired from your doctoring, and can you take on the Neutra Foundation? And, so he did, and he's been a big advocate about it. And apparently they are now working closely with Cal Poly Pomona to, I guess, possibly, I think, the Cal Poly Pomona is going to be the stewards of, moving forward. He's old too. He's in his 80s. It was
Dion, right?
No. Dion has, Dion recently passed.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I forgot about that.
This is Dion's younger brother. And Dion's younger brother was not an architect. He was a doctor.
Gotcha.
And he's
just carrying on the name.
And he's carrying on the name. But basically, I believe they're working with Cal Poly Pomona to, become stewards. It randomly, I was like, I don't know. I think I was actually looking at a video about how to use HDR settings on my Fuji. And literally, it's like one of the suggested ones were the Neutra Legacy. And I'm like, of course I'm going to click on that. And then I clicked on that and, watched most of it. It looked like a younger architect designer, probably from Eastern Europe, who was interviewing him. And it was kind of an interesting interview. A little kind of kept leaning into this relationship between Richard Neutra and Frank Lloyd Wright. But it was pretty interesting. I'm going to have to find that link and send that to you.
Yeah, I would love to see that. Cal Poly owns or is a steward of the VDL house.
Yes, and that is, I believe that is why where the connection comes from.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And when I was, I want to say second year, maybe third year, it's all a blur. We had to do like a service mission down there. Everybody had to do something for that house to keep it up because it's so expensive to keep it up. And, it's got like rooftop ponds and, it's all post and beam and glass, and it's right on Silver Lake down in Los Angeles. And I got to finally detail paint the spiral staircase in the back of the house one day because it was, it needed a new coat of paint. And it was finally detailed because like the part that there's a center post, which was one color. And then there was the part that wraps around the center post that was another color. And it had to like, with a detail brush, be like delineated between the two colors where they met, where the steel was welded. So I spent all day doing that, and various other teams were doing other things on the grounds of the house. But there's always been kind of a caretaker house in the back, and somebody who lives there also is associated with Cal Poly Pomona Architecture Department, and they. So they'll live there for years and years and be the caretaker of the house while also teaching at Cal Poly.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's neat. I mean, it's a neat house. I mean, it was very much like a research house for Neutra's architectural technologies. So it's like the front of it's got these big pivoting sunshades that let the light in versus close it out for privacy, and they're like double story right in the front of the house, and always broken.
I couldn't tell if when they were interviewing his son whether or not there seemed to be a little bit of even though yes, Neutra did work a little bit for Wright, but it seemed like there was like a little bit of beef between them, especially since
I'm sure
the Kaufmans decided to, for their LA house, decided to go with someone else. Exactly. Even though Frank was out there working and all that other stuff.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure. I mean, that doesn't sound too, like there's lots of stories like that, I guess what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, probably. Like,
yeah.
I can't.
I didn't get the sense that Frank was easy to work with ever.
Yeah, from everything. Raymond Neutra. That's his name. And yeah, Dion actually passed in 2019. I remember when that happened.
Speaking of these recognizable names in architecture, the masters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and they're the last name of, so you got Wright, you've got Neutra, you've got Lautner, you've got Schindler, and so on and so forth over the decades.
Mm-hmm.
So many, and even the latest Pritzker craze, not the latest, but there was definitely a craze with like the Starchitect kind of brands of architecture over the years. I think I want to say the last American to win it was a long time ago, but so many others, and now they've gone away from that. But I kind of makes me think about branding, right?
Yep.
That you trust. I mean, thinking about Wright, there was like, how many projects did he build? It was like over 500. It was like 553 projects or something of his were built, and they're designed. It was way more than that, like 1,500.
Exactly. I mean, he was amazingly prolific.
Yeah. And so Neutra too, right? I've got this giant Neutra book behind me.
Yeah.
The Neutra book, the one with the, and so many projects. There's several in my hometown here. Several Neutra buildings. There's a church. There's several houses. So obviously in L.A. and Hollywood Hills and tons of Neutra stuff.
Right.
It just makes you think, like, does that still happen? And if it does, I'm not aware of it. And if it doesn't, why doesn't it? And it kind of, to me, comes down to like this idea of our culture's obsession with brands. And it's a very consumerist mentality. And we don't have a lot of architectural consumers out there, granted, right? But there are some serial kind of builders. There's definitely campuses and districts and large-scale developers and stuff who could potentially align with a brand of architect. But we don't really see it happen, and it just makes me think, like, why doesn't that happen? If I was just to ask you point blank, what are some brands that are your favorites, that don't have anything necessarily to do with architecture, but if you just want to name a few, like, what are the kinds of brands that immediately come to mind? And then maybe we can talk about why.
Let's see, Chevrolet, Yakima, Fujifilm. Three that are very near and dear to my heart, of things that I kind of help contribute to some of the lifestyle things that I deal with.
Yes. Yeah. So they make things, right?
They make things.
I definitely would have pegged you for a Chevrolet, obviously the Detroit angle and the nostalgia and the loyalty kind of a angle. Yeah.
There's a little bit of loyalty because both my father and grandfather retired from General Motors, and so I was kind of raised a Chevy man. And though I haven't actually had a lot of them because I've had all sorts of different ones, I've always kind of gravitated back towards, the nostalgia of the bow tie.
Yeah.
And then I've had and just recently purchased another Yakima rooftop carrier. I beat up the first one to no end over the course of probably like a decade.
I'm more of a Thule guy myself, but I don't know why. There's no real reason for that for me.
Really?
Where are
they from?
Yeah, but that's not why. Like, I have no loyalty to Sweden.
Right.
It's like saying that, like, that's why I buy IKEA.
Well, I mean, I really just like, it's like the brand stuff, that I think about. It's like, I try out so many different brands of things, most of the time I first start off with, just like the cheapest, let's be efficient. Let's use our money wisely. And I buy something cheap. And then I realized, sometimes it really is true that, you get what you pay for. And sometimes that's not always a good thing. And so then I'm like, okay, well.
So a good brand is associated with quality.
Exactly. And so, then I look at it, okay, well, let's, step it up and say, okay, I like what this can do, but obviously I've been burnt by this one. So if I, over the course, like say the Yakima, car topper that I've got, I had like several beforehand. I mean, we travel, a lot by car. And, I had several of those, and I bought more and more and more and more, because they just fail after, like a couple of uses. I'm like, okay, if I'm going to take $70 per purchase and I do that over the course of, like, say 5 years, and it's, one per year, or if I go and I get one that's a little bit more quality brand named that, has got, high ratings, and then I purchase what I would have bought over the course of that 5 years to that one, And then I realized, oh, well, this one's now lasted me 10 years. But, by me being kind of a jackass, I kind of ripped it's the soft top one. It's not the hard top ones. Mm-hmm. And, I kind of ripped the straps off. And so now it's got two big holes in the side. So
do you ever kind of rip the straps off?
Yeah. But I mean, it lasted me for a long time, and it did a lot of, it was abuse after abuse on that thing. So
yeah, that's good stuff.
Right? So
when it's well worn and still useful, like that makes me think of Patagonia. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, that was another one that I was going to throw out too. I mean,
I think of a lot of REI type outdoorsy, North Face, Patagonia, Black Diamond. Those definitely stand out to me.
Well, you and I talked about like last episode. I just bought a pair of boots, and yeah, they're decent, and I'm using big air quotes. They're decent, but I know that they're not going to last me very long. I know they're not waterproof. I know that what I do with mine. So then I started to look at the other ones, and look at, especially when you started talking about how your trail running shoes have like lasted you forever. Mm-hmm. And you're like, let's start looking at those. Oh my gosh, they're expensive. However, it's
over time, it's cheaper.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of brands like Apple, right? I mean, they make quality stuff. They're not interested in, obviously we're going to get a lot of eye rolls out there, but they're not interested in the low end of the market. I think about guitars, right? I think about Gibsons, and I think about Martins and Taylors, and they're making stuff that is meant to last, to be the one and only, right? Like all you need is one of these. And now if you ask my dad, no, he's got 25 guitars, right? So, but it makes you start to think about like what brands don't you cheat on? Right. So like for me, that would be an Apple. That would be, and there's not very many, and there's some brands that I aspire to be in alignment with, like Airstream, again, talking about quality potentially. There's definitely brands that have this kind of association that goes along with them that is, and that doesn't, I don't think there's any category that doesn't have that. You can think about watches, you can think about shoes, you can think about handbags, you can think about fashion, you can think about, I'm thinking in my garage with tools, like I'm a Craftsman tool guy. I'm not a Snap-on tool guy, right? I don't cheat on Craftsman. And then you start to bring it more towards architecture and thinking about like the tools that we use, and thinking about the monsters out there like Autodesk and Adobe,
right?
And you can't cheat on them, right? Necessarily, just because
they're unavoidable.
Yeah, unavoidable, right? And so again, like it's not always about quality. Sometimes it's about market share. Sometimes it's about what everybody's using, and you're kind of forced to use it. But then it brings me back to architects, right? And starting to think about like, obviously there are brand architects, mm-hmm. right? And there are the Starchitect names out there. There's also non-name branded as far as like proper name. Like obviously there's the Frank Gehry's and the Zaha Hadid's, but then there's also places like Shop or Heatherwick Studios or Big, or they're more modern versions of the Starchitect. So do you have any favorite architects that you think of?
But before I answer that, let me ask it this way, or let me just like whatever. I don't know what I'm saying, but I'm going to say it. It's so if you had asked me, you said non-architectural, what are some of your favorite brands? Mm-hmm. And we started talking mm-hmm. about brands, and then we started going through like all of the different brands that you could think of. Now, these are all name brands that, like for me, there's a little bit of nostalgia to them. And then there's also the quality factor. Same thing with you. And we were talking about, like really big name brands that have sort of kind of like created the market. So if you went mm-hmm. and you asked non-architects, name me a name brand architect, who would they say?
They would say Frank Lloyd Wright, 100%.
Or if you said, hey, I'm an architect. Oh, you're an architect like Frank Lloyd Wright? You know,
Oh my gosh, my chiropractor did that to me recently. Yeah.
it, it,
Oh, Frank Lloyd Wright type. No, not really, but
yeah.
I appreciate
I was like,
I appreciate the buildings,
I
100%.
wish, you know,
Right.
he was pretty prolific. But so like if so now if we answer that question, if we start talking about the Glen markets there, for me it's like, you know, some of the oh God, I mean blanking on some, but you know, if you were to ask me like what are branded now versus like what is branded kind of like, you know, internationally, nationally known, you know, you'd say like the HOKs and people like that, you know, the SOMs, you know, the
Mm-hmm. Three-letter firms.
three-letter
Right.
firms. You know, those would be the ones that you would think of. But what's interesting is, you know, you kind of started this with, you know, architects aren't really branded. I mean, we know of big, we know of, you know, all of these, you know, big name, you know,
Oh yeah,
architecture.
this is inside baseball right here.
But
Right.
these are not like, you know, these are not like household names. And it's
They're not
interesting. It's like,
conversational. Yeah.
you know, I could, you know, maybe somebody might know Frank Gehry. Maybe somebody might know uh, Renzo Piano, maybe. I don't know. If you were to ask any like run of the mill you know, American, you know, it would be rare if they would be able to name an architect unless they knew you were an architect. They, oh, name an architect. Evan, you're
Right.
an architect. You know,
Yeah.
and it's so it's not really branded the way that
Well, the building doesn't have an association to the designer necessarily.
right.
So for instance, like you can go enjoy the High Line every day of the year that it's enjoyable
Mm-hmm.
and never know that Herzog de Meuron did it, right?
Right.
So and that's pretty normal, I think. Now, for me, I'm thinking like some architects that are my favorites are actually ones that I've visited multiple projects of,
Right.
right? So I think of Julia Morgan, I think of Gaudi,
Right.
I think of Frank Lloyd Wright, I think of Billy Chen and Todd Williams. Like for me, it's like it's this consistency of great space
Right.
and architecture that makes me notice them even more. But again, like a lot of people go to a Frank Lloyd Wright building knowing it's Frank Lloyd Wright building.
Right.
But
Right.
aside from that, I would say it's got to be like who are the more modern versions of that is probably Frank Gehry and Zaha and Tom Main.
So
I'm sure there's people yelling at the speaker right now, all the names
probably.
that they
But
they can think of faster than I
But
can.
what's funny about that, and the three that you picked, they do have very distinct styles.
Mm-hmm.
There is almost a stylistic association with their name. You know,
Well, yeah, we've talked about that before too, right? It's like to me, it's like a band with a sound.
right,
It's like they're the Police comes to mind, right? The Foo Fighters come to mind, and it's not that every album is the same, but they do have some consistency
right,
to it. Yeah.
and so that's probably so like when people think of like Frank Lloyd Wright, you know, let's just the average Joe non-architect thinks of Frank Lloyd Wright. They know his brand. They know what he is about. I mean, nowadays, I mean, other than those few people who've kind of like adopted this kind of almost stylistic, you know, branding of them and their work, there's not very many people out there. I mean, if you went to an Air St. Gross building, there's so many different people working for Air St. Gross that are, you know, have design
Yeah.
input and stuff on there, that there isn't
Right.
one Air St. Gross building. They know of it, you know, like the people who do know of Air St. Gross know, you know, and it's good quality architects, but they don't have, there is no like style to them. You know, another good example, IM Pei. I mean, you know, you almost know what you're getting out of an IMP building, but I don't know, even with IMP, with as prolific of a career that he had and all of the different works that he had, can we like really like name, I mean, we could name one or two, you know, buildings, but when somebody hears IMP, they probably may have heard of him, but they probably can't pinpoint like a specific building. Whereas like if you say, you know, Frank Gehry, if they've heard of him, they're gonna say, oh, that guy that, you know, does like the really crazy warpy buildings and all that other stuff, you know, and then
Yeah, I guess this is where I start to try to think about how that type of relationship could get established, and it almost certainly has to be in the public realm,
right?
Like a Disney concert hall,
right?
That is also where I definitely wouldn't consider that building like a product, but it is very much like a product of Frank Gehry's office only. It is very signature style,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
In that way, it is product like. But I think there's a huge opportunity right now for architects to go beyond the traditional practice to start creating space as products, because there's been such a huge shift in the way that we approach our relationship with buildings right now. Like we're still not back in the office, right? For instance, now we're doing school out of the house. What are ways we could address those kinds of issues spatially as architects? I think there has been a big opportunity to make that happen. There's a huge movement in California with ADUs and things like that. I still don't necessarily think that it's happening, right? Where people are becoming loyal to an architect or a brand of architecture. But I still think it's just kind of an interesting topic of conversation. I can't believe I didn't even mention like Louis Kahn, right? But again, it's not a household name at all. But every project I go to, I'm in awe of, and I know it's him. But it's definitely not anything that a typical somebody would recognize.
Well, so here's an interesting one. This will be a weird little controversial, twisty turny bend thing. But let's think about Michael Graves. So Michael Graves, postmodern. When I think of Michael Graves, I think of, a lot of the buildings that he did in Orlando for Disney and things like that, and these kind of like overblown. But if anybody in the non-architectural world thinks of Michael Graves, they'll probably think of the products that he created for Target.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got a peeler in the kitchen. Yeah. A crock pot.
Exactly. I've got a couple of different things, and so hell, I even have a broom, or had a broom. It broke. It wasn't well made. It wasn't well made. But I mean, so what's interesting is that like he branded himself outside of the work of architecture.
That's around design,
right?
Not architecture.
Yeah. That's why I said it was kind of a little twisty turny kind of thing, because it's not exactly what you're talking about. I mean, because like I like I said, I know of a handful of buildings that he did in Orlando for Disney, and so I automatically think of those when I think of him. I don't know how many more of Michael Graves' buildings I would really recognize, or we say, okay, yeah, that's postmodern, but is that Michael Graves or is that another postmodern guy?
Mm-hmm.
Versus like, oh, look at that like Target brand spatula or something. I know that that's Michael Graves because I've seen it enough times, and it's just kind of like inundated. He doesn't have to put his name on it. There's a stylistic approach there, and so that's more of what I was kind of like, kind of thing. But
yeah, I just think it's kind of an overall interesting thing, and again, kind of bringing it back to the Pritzker announcement today or yesterday, whenever it happened. And looking at the work that this duo has done over the years, I mean, there is something recognizable between the projects, but at the same time, I wonder if it just takes a really small, focused office to create. Although I guess if you brought up SOM earlier, SOM is very much on brand with their projects.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
They're timeless. They're sorry, that's in air quotes. But they have kind of an ethos that they follow. They want to express the structure. They want to make sure that the materials are noble. They want to, et cetera, et cetera. They have kind of this ethos that they follow with their projects. And I don't know that not every firm obviously can or will even attempt to do that. But it is kind of interesting to think about architecture from a consumer standpoint of branding and building trust and loyalty, and what the opportunities are that are out there to participate in the landscape that is capitalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how kind of choose not to in that way, or maybe want to, but haven't cracked that nut to figure out how. There's definitely firms that have done things like gone on to become developers. Think about like Jonathan Siegel and his projects down in La Jolla. Very, very on brand for him, but also, he's building them for himself. So there's no loyalty there, right? I'm just trying to think about some different potential angles. Maybe people can write in and tell us on Twitter what we're missing here. But it's just kind of interesting to think about how architecture doesn't fit this kind of category of, it's not just product, but just thinking about it as kind of holistic branding. You know, like these firms have branding. They definitely have logos, and they've got slogans, and they've got all of these things, but they're not. And I wonder if it just comes back to product and just the consumer mentality. Because you're not going to buy you're not going to build, unless you're a billionaire, multiple houses over your lifetime. You're going to build one, maybe.
Right.
Most of the time, you're just going to buy a house in a tract that's already built somewhere. So maybe that's the divide.
You know, it's interesting. So now that I'm sitting here and we've been kind of stewing over things, and when you asked me, you know, like, who are some of your favorite architects? And I kind of like stuttered, probably not expecting the question, or probably should have, but didn't. So I've said on numerous occasions, and even if no one remembers, you know, Brian McKay Lyons, one of my favorite architects out of Halifax. Now, if you think about his work, McKay Lyons Sweet Apple, they actually have what I would consider an architectural language that they work to, or they strive to. And it's mostly a regional thing. It, you know, conveys kind of like the aesthetic of the buildings that you would find around Nova Scotia and Halifax, and, you know, all those areas that, you know, are these more coastal kind of towns, you know, with very durable materials and things like that, but with a very modern take on those materials. And so if you were to like flip through his catalog, and if you knew him, you would say, oh yeah, that's definitely a McKay Lyons jam. That other, you know, there's really no others. I mean, there are a few people who've worked for him and have gone down to, you know, start their own firm and do absolutely beautiful, wonderful work. And, you know, and so you can kind of see their style kind of emerge from like the teachings of, you know, people like, you know, McKay Lyons and people like that. But I think about him, or I think about a Glenn Murcutt, you know, and I kind of liken, you know, those two together. You know, I think
of Tom Kundig.
Thank you. I was just about to say that, you know, Kundig and people like that that have kind of like, but if you think about them, they're a very regional style. You know, they draw from the areas that they practice. Now, yes, they practice all over the place, but they tend to draw from the place that they are. And so, you know, the more prolific areas of work where Brian does his work is, I say it as if I know him, although I have met him a few times because he was a visiting professor at Auburn when I was there, but he wouldn't, you know, recognize me from Boo. But you would, if I were, again, you know, as an architect, if somebody showed me, you know, some buildings, I would say, yeah, that's Brian McKay Lyons' work. You know, so that is a brand. I mean, that is something that, you know, he does. And, you know, we can kind of like run down the list of other people that kind of have a stylistic brand that is nature to them because it's where they live. And so they build within the context. Yep. Marlon Blackwell. You know, I mean, that's another great example. But, you know, they aren't household names. And I guess I think of brands like really successful brands as household names.
I've got one that's maybe better than Graves, but maybe I'm wrong. So you tell me, is the Eameses?
Yeah, yes, you are absolutely right.
I know for sure within the architecture circles, but I'm not sure outside. Like, I know people maybe recognize the chair and the ottoman, or the splint, or, you know, the shell chair, but I don't know if they know it's an Eames.
Well, I mean, I would say like because
it's most likely a knockoff, by the way.
It's interesting. It's probably, you know, we're talking catering to like a higher echelon of people who buy these things, but, you know, they probably go out and they buy them. Ooh, I have an Eames chair, you know, kind of thing. And by the way, I have an Eames knockoff.
Yeah. Same.
And sorry, I mean, it is still mid-century. You know, the funny thing is, it's still mid-century. It was one of the knockoffs that were
justifications. The list is long.
I got it at a antique store.
You didn't buy it at Design Within Reach?
No, 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 because they're
can't afford that. That's the real thing.
I was going to say they're the real things, and they can't afford that.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. That I'm just looking around my bookshelf here, and I saw the Case Study Houses book, and I thought of them because they did break out of architecture, right? Their studio in L.A. They did all kinds of things. They did film. They did products.
I have I have like I have the whole like films library of theirs. Somebody bought it for me, and I thought, this is fantastic, and I totally sunk myself into watching all of those things. They're kind of crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fantastic. And just like this insatiable drive to create, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it went beyond architecture
right.
Totally.
So it's interesting. So, we talked about the Eames and, all of their, the furniture and stuff. And they're very, what's interesting is like, I went through it had to have been at Disney, and it was like the World of Tomorrow. And it was, they, way back in the day when they idealized like, future living and stuff. Well, it was furnished with Eames furniture.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But then you like fast forward to like the time that you would have been living there, and they still use that same furniture for futuristic views on how you would live.
Yeah. It was very ahead of its time.
Very, very ahead of its
aesthetically, at least.
But, so it's
the future is uncomfortable. But it looks good.
The lounge chair, it needs a little more movement.
A little more ergonomics.
Yeah. I can't find I was trying to find, for some reason I'm completely blanking on the replica Eames lounger that I, mid-century one.
Mm-hmm. I don't know
either. I mean, there was, there's all sorts of different ones that they had, but there was like a kind of Plycraft was the one that everybody like the big name one,
right?
But there was another company that actually was a little bit more faithful to Eames and the knockoff, knocking it off. And has just the right amount of legs on the chair and the right amount of like little legs on the footstool, and because there's 5 on the chair, 4 on the footstool, but the only thing that you can tell mine is definitely a knockoff versus like the other one are the way that the arms are attached, and for some reason I'm just blanking on that particular company that actually made it. I believe it Silic. That was it. That was the company. I don't know what. I just went down the wrong way. Went down some.
Yeah, I don't know that there's really an end to this topic. It's just something to explore, think about, and I wonder if I get the sense that firms aspire for that kind of. Notoriety is not the right word, but you know what I mean, like that recognition.
Yeah.
But is it even possible to achieve it in the same way? I don't know that it is. Like over 1 billion people use the iPhone, right? I get that. It's not going to happen with architecture, right?
No,
I don't think.
Well, I mean, it's because like right now. So, and I'm kind of speculating with Frank Lloyd Wright, but Frank Lloyd Wright, he himself was the marketing tool. He himself was larger than life. I mean, he lived a life where, people wrote books on him. He was in the tabloids all the time. He was on TV all the time. And, so like he was out marketing himself. And so he became a cultural icon in his own right. And so as he was becoming the cultural icon, his work was being, recognized like, okay, well, what is this Joker, that I see on whatever that TV show with Groucho Marx was, like This Is Your Life or something like that. And, and so they're like, who is this guy? And so they like look him up and they say, I I've seen, houses like this, or I've seen houses like that. And so, then they associate the brand of the person and the brand of the architecture. And so you kind of get that. I mean, there are so few that I think that you can name as a non-architect that you could say, give them a name and they would give you some of the work. I mean, even Korb of all people, could you, if you were a non-architect, because you don't have access to most of his work or any of his work really, if you heard Corbusier, if you were a non-architect, you'd say, I think I've heard of him before. He's a architect, I think. Well, tell me some of his work. Got me there.
Right.
But Frank Lloyd Wright, guarantee, even Joe American will come up with something that they can say, oh yeah, Guggenheim, or oh yeah,
but again,
yeah.
like public, very public.
Again, yes,
at least the ones that people do recognize are public.
Yep, absolutely right.
Or have some kind of status, right? Like just an very interesting thing to think about, and whether it's achievable or not. And I would love to hear examples of who is achieving that and why that is the perception. Because I think a lot of people are looking for that, but I don't know how they go about it, how they accomplish that, or if it's even deserved. I'm not saying it is, but it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about, I guess.
Right.
Because I've got all these books on my bookshelf with a bunch of monographs, and who cares who comes and visits my house? Not that there's anybody visiting my house, but nobody cares about this.
The only people who would come to your house and say, "Ooh, look at that! You have a Dali book," is me when I say, "Oh, look, you have a Dali book," and I pick it up. But yes. I mean, otherwise, if it's not.
No, my kids don't even know who the
yeah,
and they've seen these books all the time. It's probably why they ignore them, but it's also like it's not their world. So that's I think another part of it's penetrating somebody's world is pretty impossible on an architectural scale unless it's something they really take an interest in, and then it's only going to be like one building. And again, how do you even find out who did that building?
Right.
There's definitely a marketing problem within architecture.
Yeah, and I read something, and I believe it had to have been on the Entre Architect Facebook page, and somebody had mentioned something about, is it a violation, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing right now from memory, is it a violation of like ethics to market yourself in like print or TV or whatever? And, it's interesting because a lot of people had a lot of different takes on them, and most of them were like, oh no, it's really, it was just frowned upon because, we were supposed to be a noble profession and stuff, and you don't go out advertising yourselves. You work comes to you. You don't go to work.
You sit around and wait.
You sit around and wait. And what's interesting about that is that's probably why we aren't more recognizable, like both as a profession and work by our professionals, by the people that you and I look up with and own tons of monographs for us, because they did the noble thing. They didn't go out and pimp themselves out. They basically just said,
did the work.
They just did the work. But the thing is that what is wrong with pimping yourself out? What is wrong with, like actually, putting yourself, I mean, I flipped through, like, we've got a local, like the Bethesda magazine, and, it's advertising stores and shops and services and everything else. And there are tons of interior designers, a few architects and stuff like that are, do full page spread advertisements. What's wrong with that? It's marketing yourself. It's branding. It's branding yourself. So bring it back to like, we're, how do you make a brand if you're not out there selling your brand? Frank Lloyd Wright sold his brand.